I don't know about you, but I have absolutely no desire to pay the legal bills because some corporation decided they were going to sue America because they can't pollute, and it's going to stop them from earning a profit. And I don't want to breathe your garbage, and I have no interest in paying you because you weren't able to do it. All right, our next speaker is, on a personal note, when we started the Middle Class Action Project, we made a conscious effort to get the word out any way possible. Every form of social media that we could address, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. And through that, we made a really close ally. And she's our next speaker. And I consider her to be a go-to person for anything that we need. She's never said no to us. She's from Build a Better Planet, and she's going to be discussing the environmental consequences of the TPP, and her name is Soleil Haren.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So a little bit of background, and I'm going to touch a little bit on issues that Adam and Mary brought up as well. In 2005, the Trans-Pacific Strategic Partnership Agreement was formed, and that consisted of the U.S., Chile, New Zealand, and Singapore. And as Adam pointed out, 11 countries total now form part of this agreement. But Taiwan and South Korea are also likely to be joining. And other countries that have expressed an interest include the Philippines, Laos, Cambodia, Indonesia, Bangladesh, India, Thailand, and of course China, but they're not quite in the picture yet, so that's just kind of out there. At Build a Better Planet, we promote sustainability. So we actually have 2 radio shows, Green Living and Época Verde, both of which are on Third Strike Radio. You can actually find the Middle Class Action Project has a link to their show there, and Progressive Union. But I made it a conscious point when I started Build a Better Planet to say that I was going to help bring news that you're not going to hear from the mainstream media, because they have other topics to talk about, like Justin Bieber and Kim Kardashian, I guess things that are more important, right? So I'm going to bring news that you really should be hearing rather than Justin Bieber. So one concern I thought of with regard to the TPP is the concern for workers. And unfortunately, our media has really created a society. If you think about it, how does the media run? It runs on commercials and advertisements, so we got to buy a lot of stuff. But we pay a price for all this stuff that we buy, particularly when we want to buy cheaper and cheaper stuff. So concerning the health of workers and the workers that are going to be affected by this, and you have to be careful with certain agreements that are already in place, like there actually is an agreement with Macau. Macau is an island off the coast of Hong Kong, and companies like Tommy Hilfiger, Ralph Lauren buy their shirts that's made in America. Actually, no, it's not. It's probably made in Macau, but they get by on a little loophole and saying they're made in America when they're not. So when I was growing up was when Walmart was kind of getting into the picture, and Walmart promised everything's made in America. Well, no, it's not. By the way, in Mexico, there's actually a Banco de Walmart. Walmart has a bank in Mexico. So that's a little kind of scary to me. But anyway. So when talking about health of workers, companies like Walmart are already contracting factories, that are really running sweatshops, basically. And so you look at the conditions, for instance, just 2 years ago in Bangladesh, 117 people were killed and at least 200 were injured in the Tazreen Fashion Factory fire that was, Tazreen Fashion Factory done by the Tuba Group, which was contracted by Walmart on the outskirts of Dhaka, Bangladesh. And when you look at the conditions, it was very reminiscent of what we saw here in New York in 1911 with the Triangle Factory fire. Little girls working in a building where they were locked into the building to keep them from leaving. So when the fire started, they couldn't get out. Another great example, and Steve Jobs is someone that everybody kind of revered as an icon or a saint or whatever, but after his death, I actually saw a T-shirt that said, "Steve Jobs didn't make your iPad, children in China did." So that's actually true. Foxconn Factories is the group of factories that they're in China. They produce most of your Apple products. And most of the Apple products are, again, made by young little girls. At the Foxconn factories, they're basically, again, sweatshops. The workers live there. They don't get to go home. They live in this compound, and it was rumored that they get maybe 2 days off a year. Foxconn claims that they're now allowing them more privileges, but they actually had to install nets to keep the workers from committing suicide. So imagine a job that's so bad that you can't even die to get out of. But then there's the very real concern about our health. And, we did have, the scare a few years ago with toys for children that were coming from China laced with lead, lead-coated paint. So there's one thing that Mary had pointed out was about agriculture, and a lot of the products that we don't think about coming from China, we think about manufactured products. But when looking at some of these other countries like Mexico, Chile, Vietnam, India, there's also a great deal of agricultural products. And unfortunately, a company that's been making great headway into getting into these countries is Monsanto. And for instance, and with very devastating effects, one thing they found in India was when they introduced GMO cotton into India, that farmers started reporting their livestock, their sheep were dying from coming into contact with this GMO cotton. And so, just to digress a little bit on the topic of GMOs, because, we often hear, oh, perfectly safe. They're beyond a shadow of a doubt. Extensive studies have been done in Europe, like in France, for instance, that have proven that GMOs are not safe. GMOs cause cancer. In particular, they cause a lot of reproductive cancers. And one reason for that, when you look at something like GMO soy, for instance, GMO soy is a xenoestrogen, which is a fake form of estrogen. So basically, and one thing I always tell people on the show, we always do a food component to our show, Green Living. And I always tell people, when you go to the grocery store, read your labels. Just a little quick aside, Taco Bell is no longer allowed to call their beef tacos because they're only 35% beef, which then begs the question, what on earth is the other 65% you're eating? So you'll find soy in just about everything, meat products, you name it. So they contain xenoestrogens, which is the equivalent of taking large doses of fake estrogen. You're basically taking birth control pills. And since GMO foods were introduced in the United States, or allowed to be sold in the United States in the 1990s, you've seen huge numbers skyrocketing of, again, female cancers, breast cancer. I'm sure almost everybody in this room has someone they know who's had breast cancer. Onset of early puberty in little girls going through puberty at 11, 10, 9, 8, 7 years of age. Onset of female traits in little boys, for instance, developing breasts, which is definitely not normal. Infertility, this is actually kind of a scary thought. Little boys today have 1/2 the sperm count of little boys a generation ago. So if that trend continues, the next generation is going to be down to like 1/4. So eventually the plan is to kill all of us off with cancer, and then the next couple generations will basically be sterile. So not a pretty picture. They're also linking GMOs to other conditions like food allergies. And when I was a little girl, every little kid ate peanut butter jelly, PB&J sandwich. Today, little kids will have a peanut and drop dead, or they got to carry their EpiPens. You've never heard of this before. Conditions like celiac syndrome, which is gluten sensitivity, same thing. And nobody was ever allergic to gluten before. Other conditions, and this is, again, very skewed for some reason towards little boys, but 1 in 4 little boys in the United States is diagnosed with ADD and ADHD, and they are linking it, again, to GMO foods. A very conservative number says that 1 in 87 little boys in the United States is autistic. And just a generation ago, you never heard of autism a generation ago, and now it's 1 in 87. So that's a very conservative number. So this is alarming. And I'm actually going to come back to autism in a minute. But there are other studies as well trying to link, or that are linking GMOs to conditions like obesity, diabetes. I mean, we call type 2 diabetes. It used to be called adult onset, but now it's called type 2 because so many little kids have it, which is terrifying. So again, these companies like Monsanto and their buddies at ConAgra and Dow Chemical, they're seeing their markets dry up in the United States because luckily more and more Americans are saying, I don't want your frankenfoods, and opting to eat healthier options and shop organically or grow their own. And in Europe, their market is virtually dried up. In the European Union, countries like Germany and France do not touch anything that's not organic. They've long since stopped buying our meat products because our meat products are full of hormones and antibiotics and so forth. So now Monsanto is looking for a new market. So they're looking to all of these countries, Mexico, the Asian countries, and saying, hey, let's sell them our frankenfoods. And the chemicals, the herbicides and pesticides themselves. And it kind of creates a situation of a really insidious economic racism, if you will. Because you look at chemicals like DDT, for instance, that have long been outlawed in the United States because we know how toxic DDT is, but yet it's perfectly okay for these chemical companies to sell it to Central America, Mexico, whoever. But the problem with that kind of blind thinking is that it still comes back to you on the table you put on your food every single day. You just go to the grocery store, read the labels where your food is coming from. It's coming from a lot of these countries. And something that's particularly insidious is when you think of and I'm almost to a wrapping up point here, so when you think of chemicals like, say, Agent Orange, and everybody my age or older certainly remembers that during the conflict in Vietnam when Agent Orange was sprayed as a defoliant over Southeast Asia with the intent of killing the foliage so we could see where the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese were hiding. Well, to this day, there are still servicemen from the United States, Australia, New Zealand, still living with the horrific effects of Agent Orange, cancer, so forth. Their children have a lot of psychological and cognitive problems. Again, autism is one of the problems that's been linked to Agent Orange. And unfortunately, the people of Vietnam and Southeast Asia, now the main ingredient in Agent Orange is dioxin, and they suffered tremendously because if you think about it, it was sprayed through the air, all over the country, so it got into the water, it got into the soil. So here we are over 40 years after Vietnam, and 3 generations later, babies are still being born in Southeast Asia with horrific birth defects, some born without eyes, some born with misshapen limbs, cleft palate, a number of problems. So now we're going to open the floodgates to bring in products like, say, rice, coming from these countries where, they're growing in this water, in this soil, and who knows how long it's going to be toxic? The problem is nobody knows because we have no idea how long this is going to be, deadly or how many generations this is going to affect. So, just to kind of wrap up, these are all really, really serious issues that we need to think about. And even going into, again, the idea of shipping jobs out, the idea of disposal in our waste. And there are 2 main reasons that basically Asia has become a big dumping ground for our garbage. 2 big reasons. One is you don't have to worry about worker safety again. So when you think of ships that are taken apart in dry dock, here in the U.S., the ship would be placed in dry dock, and the work would be done by men given appropriate training and safety, safety precautions, safety equipment. In Bangladesh, these ships are taken apart at sea. So asbestos, mercury, whatever's falling off the ship is going into the water, where that's where we get our seafood from. And it's mostly being done by young teenagers, some of them with flip-flops, shorts, sunglasses instead of welding gear. I mean, it's absolutely criminal. And the biggest problem right now in China and India is e-waste. And e-waste is, again, those iPads. When you get that next generation iPhone, the old one's got to go somewhere. Guess where it's ending up? In China. And mainly because these countries don't have a lot of regulations and restrictions. They're paid to take our e-waste, so they take it. So you basically have big open pits where little children are playing in all of these old gadgets. And when you think about a computer, a printer, an iPhone, whatever, every single part of that e-gadget is toxic. You know, the plastics, the lead, the wiring, it's all toxic, and it all ends up back in our water. So just something to think about. And definitely, you know, again, you can't have this mentality that we're going to kind of sweep problems under the rug, because it's still coming back to us in our food and in our water. And clearly we already see the health effects that it is having in our population now. Thank you.